Hey, everybody, welcome to Chuck Yates Needs a Job, the podcast. I am jet lagged as hell, but it's because I spent the last 2 weeks with Brian Sheffield down in Australia going through his Beetaloo Basin play. We literally have a terabyte worth of video because Brian was cool enough to let me follow him around with a camera crew. So we're going to create some dope-ass content there. I swear it's going to take me a while because there's so much to go through. But I got to meet a couple of cool people when I was there. So y'all saw Stephanie Berlin last week talking about the Northern Territory and all things energy. Today's podcast, Alex Underwood, publicly traded company, Empire. They've got a position in the Beetaloo. Alex is a great dude. I hope you find this cool. But anyway, it's all things Australia. See ya.
I come from like many generations in the mining industry, which was one of my huge incentives to do this. And my great-grandfather ran a mine in Burma called Baldwin. His boss was Herbert Hoover.
No way.
Who was a very successful mining engineer. But there's just some cool intercept between the Australian mining industry and family history through to just an interesting little link into the US.
No,
with
it's
Herbert
totally
Hoover.
cool.
So,
yeah.
Just an
We
idea.
we generally acknowledge Hoover to be one of our worst presidents.
Oh, really? Okay, well, maybe we won't go there. I wasn't aware of that.
But it's got
He built a dam.
He built a dam. And you've been rolling, right?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. I'm glad you got all that. Because so Hoover was the president right before the Great Depression.
Oh,
and,
right.
And so he gets tagged with the Great Depression, even
Yeah,
though I
right.
think we've all figured out it doesn't really matter who
Yeah,
the president
yeah.
is.
It was a
and
good
so-
time until then.
Yeah, exactly. Up until then, so was there family talk like around the dinner table with Dad? I mean, is that how you call it?
Oh, so it's my
bug, or-
mum's father and
So
her grandfather. But yeah, mum's written this full family history on it, and yeah, it was all sort of a big motivation for me to go into the industry. That my grandfather and his father had built some of the biggest mining projects in the world of their day, and you know that's the opportunity we have with the Beetaloo, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So how did you get your start? What did you do? College finance major or accounting
Yeah, so
major?
at uni, I studied commerce and law, but then I really wanted to go into the industry. So I started my career at BHP Billiton in their petroleum division. And I just happened to be allocated to the petroleum division for my first rotation as a grad. 18 months into that, I went to Macquarie Bank in their commodities business, financing oil and gas projects. And it was like debt and
Which
equity.
city are you in? Doing
So
that?
I was in Sydney initially,
Sydney.
and then I went to Singapore for the last 3.5. So I was in Sydney for 6.5 years with Macquarie. Then they moved me up to Singapore. But that was an awesome business. So it was all the bank's money. It wasn't funds or anything like that.
Yeah,
we
because
could-
y'all had a big group in Houston. So
Yeah,
I
so
actually
we were-
I interacted with those guys in Houston.
Yeah, right. So Paul Beck and
Paul
all
Beck,
those
gosh,
guys. Yeah.
he's-
So
yeah,
yeah,
forever.
they were my bosses.
And
yeah. There was Ray Weems, Randy
I lived two houses.
Wildenstein.
Well, the former Mrs. Yates has got the house in the
Yeah,
divorce,
right.
but I lived 2 houses down from one of Beck's
Kent
lieutenants.
Williamson was the technical
Gosh,
guy.
yeah.
Brian Hughes, Jerry
Yeah,
Thompson.
Brian Hughes was 2 houses down. So
Yeah, right.
It was Maynard Holt of
Yeah.
Tudor Pickering Holt,
Yeah,
Brian Hughes, 2 lawyers, and then the Yateses. And,
Yeah,
The
right.
former Mrs. Yates still lives there.
so I was in the same team as them. They were the biggest team globally, and then we were a little offshoot business here in Sydney. But there were a few ASX listed companies that were investing in like the Eagle Ford Shale, for example. And then, you know, we were doing lots of deals out of Houston. And so that was where I kind of understood the playbook for shale gas, right? Huge resource, and you've got to show that it's economic, and that's where you get the huge value uplift.
Did you
And yeah.
Did you remember Dave Lenormand out of Oklahoma
No.
City? Paul did a big deal with him at one point, and I just told a joke the other night in my speech about Dave Lenormand, and I panicked for a second. Oh shit, it's going to get back to him.
Oh, no. Which company was that at?
He was Crusader.
Yeah,
or
okay, that
Knight-
vaguely
Knights,
sounds familiar.
Templar. It was
Yeah,
always
yeah,
some
yeah.
variation of
Yeah.
that. Yeah, but I remember he did a big deal with Paul at one point
Yeah,
because I served as a reference for Lenormand. So yeah, we backed him. We backed him 3 times, and figured out and made a lot of money with him. And he just better dealed us later on, which
Yeah,
good for
right.
him. So
Yeah.
yeah. So how long were you Macquarie?
so nearly 10 years.
Oh wow.
And then I moved over to Commonwealth Bank of Australia up in Singapore for a couple of years, but wasn't much going on there. I stayed in touch with the former CEO of Empire, Bruce McLeod, who was one of my clients when I was at Macquarie. So that's a really interesting story as well. So Empire, it was a company that had gone through many iterations back in 20, 30 years ago. But in the mid 2000s, Bruce decided to move into oil and gas. And
So when you say iterations, was it mining, retail?
yeah, mining companies.
Mining. Okay,
Yep.
gotcha.
And then
Because we do we have oil and gas companies in America that did all sorts of crap, retail.
yeah.
So just curious.
Yeah. But I think they had a mineral sands project in Western New South Wales. They sold it to the Saudis, collected some money. Then Bruce started buying conventional, mature producing assets in the US. He picked up an old conventional asset in Northwest Pennsylvania that was like a whole bunch of wellbores collectively doing like 5 million cubic feet a day. And then he bought an asset package in New York State, which is why we're called Empire.
Okay.
Possibly the worst place in America to do oil and gas business other than California. But and then what happened was, so the Marcellus Shale, I think we bought the PA assets in like 2006.
Okay.
There was no value on the Marcellus rights. And then by 2008, we sold them to, I want to say Range or someone like that,
It was probably
for like
Range.
$4,250 an acre.
And that was all the money in the world then.
Oh
Too.
yeah,
I mean,
hell yeah.
The first, the beginning of this.
Yeah, and so we sold off the shale rights, and then Bruce kept buying assets in America. So he bought the New York gas production, he bought oil production in Kansas. But then the other thing he did, which was really smart, so he thought, well, if there are shale basins in the US, there must be shale basins in Australia. And so, so he met up with John Warburton, who's a geologist who now sits on our board, and said to John, go and find me some shale basins in Australia. And so at the time, I think the only company in the Beetaloo that had leased acreage was Falcon Oil and Gas. And John did a trip around Australia. And, in Australia, the minerals are very different to the US, where they're owned by the government, rather than in America, where the minerals are owned privately. So the way you would lease exploration acreage in these frontier basins is you'd literally walk into a government office called their Geological Survey. So he went into the Northern Territory Geological Survey, met up with the guy who runs it, who's still there, a guy called Bunge, who's another great Northern Territorian, and said, oh, well, what shale basins have you got? And he said, well, we've got the Greater MacArthur and the Beetaloo Sub-Basin. And so John delineated 14.5 million acres on a map and put in the application and got it. And that's how we got started. So, there was sort of a bit of that US shale history that got us into shale here in Australia. And, this basin, it's sort of been, it's like the overnight success that's years in the making, right?
Right.
Like, it was a pretty slow start. There was a moratorium on fracking from 2016 to 2018. The government lifted that
By the
moratorium.
way, supposedly, I heard this from the Tamboran guys. Only government ever to put a frack ban in place and then remove it.
That's
in
probably
the history
right,
of the world. Yeah.
That's probably right.
I mean, New York still has their frack moratorium on, and I don't know if California has one yet, but yeah, everywhere they put a moratorium on, except for the Northern Territory.
Well, in the state of Victoria, which is down to the south of us here in Australia, not only did they ban fracking, but they put it in their constitution that you cannot frack. And guess
Really?
what? They've run out of gas and prices. I think it was last week or the week before, prices spiked to 28 Australian dollars an MCF. So
And that was greed.
yeah.
Oh, it's all greed. What? Hold on, time out. Yeah,
But yeah, so I joined in 2018 as the moratorium was being lifted, and we've sold off all our US assets. We're a Beetaloo pure play now, and getting after it, trying to move into production.
So the way I understand it, the Beetaloo, we had Santos, Origin, at least poke some holes around.
Yep.
So we kind of knew where the shale was, and we had some evidence of deliverability. I think Origin had Mungie.
Amungi Northwest 1H. Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
million cubic feet a day for 90 days, basically out of the heel.
Yeah, like
But
a
you
couple
at
of
least,
hundred meters.
you at least figured out there was gas there.
Yep.
So my understanding, y'all drilled a couple of wells. What do we know there?
Yeah, so we've drilled 2 verticals and 2 horizontals.
Okay.
So we've got about 110,000 acres on the east of the basin, and then like 1 million acres on the west of the basin, sort of where the Daily Waters pub is.
I am familiar.
Yeah. And so
Did we show you the clip?
Yeah, that was awesome.
Oh God,
I've
we
been
sent that to you. Great. Yeah.
I've been sharing that liberally.
Yeah, Tim's funny.
Yeah. And so when I started with Empire, we didn't own the stuff on the west. So we just had the 110,000 acres on the east and completely unexplored. All we knew was where the basin outcropped further out to the east. Interesting bit of history. So Aubrey McClendon was actually going to farm into our asset when he was at American Energy Partners. And there was a deal fully papered up, ready to go. And unfortunately, it never completed due to his unfortunate accident. But the way we got started with our exploration program was we literally shot the 2D program that he had designed, like the exact lines that he was planning to shoot. Then we drilled our first well, Carpentaria 1, in about 2020. And where we are in the basin, it is a bit shallower than the center of the basin, but also we've got, this genuine stacked pay. I mean, like 4 really nice zones. The other amazing thing about this basin is the logs are like, you can put a whole spread of logs from 300 kilometers west to east, and they're just like carbon copy lookalikes the whole way across. So we drilled that well. Then we did another infill seismic survey and then started drilling short horizontals. So, we did a 4-stage vertical frac on that first well and got gas to surface from each zone. The B shale was the best performer out of the 4, which is the zone that we're all targeting at the moment. So then we drilled our first horizontal Carp 2H a couple of years ago. Very funky well design. So it was in 4.5, not 5.5 inch casing. We're going to move to 5.5 on this next well. In Australia, we have a higher stress regime than the US, so that increases the risk of screen out on slick water fracs. And so we trialled some slick waters, but we also trialled a bunch of different gels. And yet we got about 3 million cubic feet a day on that well, which we were very happy with. Then we've drilled another horizontal well more recently, Carpentaria 3H. Starting to hone in on frac designs and all the rest of it, but that was also in 4.5 inch, due in large part to just lack of availability of equipment. So, here in Australia, when you order your drill pipe, you've got to bring it from the States, from China, right? And the lead times are huge. We don't have inventories of pipe lying around. But then while we had the rig out there, we drilled an extension vertical Carpentaria 4V, which again had just awesome logs and carbon copy of where we've been drilling, but probably 500 or so feet deeper. What we're planning to do now is drill our first pilot development well. So it's going to be a 2-mile lateral, 5.5 inch casing, obviously on the back of that amazing result at Shenandoah. And given the data that we've collected on our own wells,
Let's do this real quick. I'm going to cut you off.
Yep.
What's the Shenandoah reference you just made?
the Shenandoah South 1H well that Tamboran and Daily Waters and Falcon have just drilled. So incredible result.
Because they drilled it 5.5 inch slick water frac, right?
Yep.
And correct me on this, but they produced it, I think, 90 days at what, 20 million a day?
So the actual rate across the 500 meters was like 3 million cubic feet a day, which extrapolated to a 2-mile lateral gets you to your 20 million cubic feet a day. One thing that was incredible about that well was how shallow the decline is. I mean, like the IP30 and the IP90 are almost like there's only slightly different numbers. So it's a barnstormer of a well. And you know, what's so exciting is that that well was probably only like the 5th or 6th horizontal drilled in this entire basin, right? So to be getting results like that so early in the evolution of the play is extremely exciting. But the other really important relevance of this for anyone from the States who's watching this is that our gas market is completely different to the US gas market. So despite being one of the world's largest exporters, we're facing chronic shortages in our domestic market. I just mentioned the price that got to Victoria the other day. Typically, Australian gas in the domestic market tends to trade at around $9 an MCF. So when you get 20 million cubic feet a day, but you're getting paid $9,
that's
kind of like a
money.
60 million cubic feet a day well when you're getting 253, right?
Right.
So, it's an incredibly exciting result. And, I think it's the basin opening well, and it's just an awesome result for that JV.
Yeah, and it seems like we've got equipment now.
Yep.
Who brought in the drilling rig?
So H&P's brought a rig in.
Yep.
Liberty's frac spread, I think, is on the water right now, so that'll be in country soon. And
I've got a picture of it in the Port of Houston being loaded up, so we'll throw that in the middle of this podcast.
Nice.
Yeah, Sheffield sent that to me.
But I mean, on frac, right? So, I think we had 12,000 horsepower at our disposal for our first couple of wells. I think when Tamboran did their most recent well before Shenandoah South 1H, they had to bring in half a spread from New Zealand just to get it up to 18. And the frac equipment in Australia was never designed for shale. It's designed for like really small coal seam methane wells, or you guys call them coal bed methane wells, tight sand verticals. So, bringing in the specialist equipment and the expertise from the States, I think means that results like that Shenandoah South 1H could almost become like a baseline with opportunity to grow from there. So, yeah.
So give me kind of financial metrics on you guys. What, plus or minus $200 million market cap company?
Yeah, so 250 million Aussie market cap, which is about 170 US. In terms of our resource numbers against that market cap, we've got over 42 TCF of prospective resource booked by Netherland Sewell. The limiting factor on conversion to 2C is literally just well control. So we know the gas is there, but we've just got to drill more wells to delineate more 2C. We've converted 1.6 TCF to 2C with only that handful of wells that I just described. Aiming to move into 2P shortly with our plans to move into production. We recently raised money, and Brian Sheffield and Liberty provided cornerstone support to that raise, which we're very appreciative of. In that raise, we started getting US institutions onto our register for the first time, and also very strong support from existing shareholders here in Australia. But that leaves us with a cash balance of around 50 million Australian dollars right now, which is best financial position we've ever been in. And that'll see us fully funded for the drilling of this well, frac, flow test. And we're also working on some other financing that in the success case will be very low dilution or no dilution around installing a secondhand gas plant that we bought late last year. So we were very fortunate to pick up a gas plant that just happened to be all the right specs for us. It was actually processing gas on the outskirts of Sydney here for a number of years. We picked that up for 2.5 million Australian dollars to refurb the compressors and install it. You know, very, very limited amount of capital there, probably 20 million Aussie or so of capital there. So, you know, if we can get all that financing to come together the way we think it will, then, you know, we should be fully funded to first gas.
I think I gave you the Yates rule of financing when
Yeah.
we had lunch the other day, but I'll say it again just because I'm going to beat the dead horse on
Yeah.
this. I've had 1 million beers with CEOs in my career where the CEO's like, gosh, you know, if I just had a little bit more money, I could have done this during the downturn. I could have done this. I could have ridden through here. I've never had a beer with a CEO where they looked at me and said, I just raised too much money. That was my problem. I was just always awash in money. Raise money every time you get a chance.
Oh, 100%.
I mean,
and
you've got so much resource in front of you.
Yeah.
You've got use of proceeds.
so I couldn't agree more.
It almost sounds like I'm an investment banker. I'm unemployed. I don't even have a dog in this hunt. But yeah.
Well, I guess like you, I'm sort of like a recovering investment banker or a reformed investor in the space. And you know, when I was at Macquarie Bank, you know, we used to see every cap raise that was coming through the Australian capital markets for oil and gas, right? And so I used to sit on the other side of that table, and yeah, I mean, one of my golden rules is you don't take the money when you need it, you take it when it's there and it's available, right? And
I used to work for
Yeah.
this old crusty guy at Stevens, and he said 2 great things. Number one was use of proceeds is bullshit. You sell equity when the market will give it to you. That was number one. And the other one thing he always said, because we were talking one time and something about, you know, investment banking is hard. He goes, oh, hell, it's easy. Just state the obvious with an air of discovery. So, okay, so we've got the big, huge, massive gas play. We've got enough holes in the ground so we can map it. We've got proof of deliverability. We got Shenandoah, at least with a recipe of something that's got to be an economic well, right?
Oh,
I mean,
yeah, 100%.
even though it's costing a whole lot of money, you guys have the same thing on your acreage, although you're shallower. Historically, shallower is two-edged sword. Maybe you don't have as much pressure. Flip side, costs less to drill.
Yep.
Any ideas there?
Yeah, I mean,
Or do we not know yet?
it is certainly earlier days, and absolutely, you know, the deeper you go, the more gas storage there is, right? I mean, more pressure. What I would say is this basin is overpressured throughout. You know, where we are, we're well over 0.5 psi per foot. So you know that you've got good drive there. In terms of our cost to date, we have been running consistently at lower costs than other operators in the basin. But, you know, I should stress with Tamboran and Brian now coming in, they understand that lower cost mindset as well. It tends to be when very large companies really struggle to bring their costs down in these earlier stages. But, you know, we do see the potential for somewhat of an enduring, you know, cost benefit of being shallower. The other thing is, you know, speaking to some of the technical experts out of the US who are helping us, you know, on this upcoming program on design and so on and so forth, you know, we will have a bit better perm and porosity going forward. So we don't expect the same peak rates as others, but we're hoping that, you know, we have a slightly shallower decline out the back end. But, you know, what I would say is, even at this early stage, I think everyone in this basin is going to make a lot of money. And, you know, it is yet to be seen where the best parts of the basin are. The other thing that's very interesting about where we are in the basin, so on the basin flanks, the gas is a little bit less thermally mature, so you've got a bit more ethane in your gas. And ethane is normally a bit of a distraction, right? Like you don't want too much ethane in your methane stream because you might have to strip it. But interestingly, the composition of our gas is actually very well suited to the way the Japanese domestic gas market was set up. So the Japanese reticulation system is a high ethane system. And so we see that further down the track, that gas composition could be very interesting to the parties that are exporting gas to Japan. And interestingly, you would have seen the LNG plants flying in and out of Darwin last week. There was actually a tanker on the Ichthys project when I was flying in on Wednesday, but
I think we tried to get footage of it. We just kept missing it.
oh no,
Yeah, so I don't know if we wound up having footage of it or not. Jacob, we didn't get any footage.
That's a shame, because when they're going through the harbour, like where Parliament House is,
yeah.
They are towering in front of you. It's awesome to see.
Mark's my new best friend.
Oh yeah, he's a legend.
So Mark actually showed us around Parliament, and we stood out there because supposedly the tanker was coming by.
Yeah,
but it's just massive. These big, huge tankers.
Yeah, they're huge. But yeah, so Darwin already provides Japan with 11% of its total gas demand. So, we see potential opportunities down the track that, once the local market's supplied and once Australia's east coast is supplied, the specific, spec of gas we have could be very well suited to export to Japan down the track.
I mean, I don't think I appreciated this until I started digging in. And I'm going to say this kind of snarky and sarcastically. It's a little easier to get LNG from Australia to Japan than it is from the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard
little cheaper.
And Darwin is literally as close as you can get to the major demand centres of Asia from any major gas supply source in the world. So much closer than Qatar, much closer than the US. There's also issues getting ships through the Panama Canal as well, right? Like blockages and all the rest of it.
I'm sure we can mess that up somehow. We seem to be doing. The U.S. just put a halt on LNG.
Yeah, that was mad.
Yeah, which is, it's an election year. You got to, the Democratic base needs to hear that you're halting hydrocarbons, but the rest of the world's cutting deals, and these deals are like 30 and 40 and 50-year deals. And we'll just go to the sidelines for a while. That's real smart.
When Ukraine kicked off, it got so dire that there were actually, I'm not sure how many, but at least one cargo of LNG went from Australia all the way to Europe. That's a long way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the future of LNG is really exciting, I reckon, because, the more renewables you have, the more gas you need. But the other thing is that, looking at it from a macro perspective, right? So we're facing these major gas shortages, and the Australian Energy Market Operator is constantly coming up with long-term forecasts of demand and then long-term forecasts of supply. Those forecasts show gas demand staying flat for decades and then supply dropping. I think all of those analysts are getting the demand forecast totally wrong. Like the stuff I've been learning about AI, with this exponential increase in the amount of energy that's going to be required. Like we've had exponential increase in energy demand of all types since industrialization. And I don't think it's just going to flatline. It's going to keep going, right?
We burn more wood today for fuel than at any other point in the history of the planet.
Well,
there is no such thing as a transition. We haven't, except for maybe whale blubber, we really haven't, transitioned away from anything. Yeah, AI is going to be crazy. I did a podcast with the head of AI for Intel, the big chip manufacturer.
Yeah.
And we were sitting there talking about it. And there are actually very smart people on both sides that talk about AI. It's going to be interesting to see how much we'll actually pay for it. It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, there were a lot of things in the early days of the internet where you would build websites and all, and we wound up not paying for it. It's like, if we could get it for free, we wouldn't do it. And so you can make an argument for we'll have 3 to 5 supermassive AI language models that get trained, and everybody else will just have these small little databases that run called RAG models. And so we might actually not use as much electricity because really over the last, call it 20 years in the United States, electricity usage has gone down
Yep.
except for including the AI data centers that have been built in the state of Virginia. And so
No
it's
way.
up just slightly. And it's because all these data centers got really efficient. They got really good
Yeah, yeah.
because energy was a cost.
Yeah.
And one of the things Zane talked about, this guy was like, imagine if we start turning AI on the design of these centers. Hey, go solve for energy. So there's a case that it actually may not take that much of electricity. Then there's the case that, you're driving home and you you stop at Taco Bell, you walk in, your heated toilet's all ready to go and stuff
Yeah,
because
yeah.
AI is watching all this. And we may pay a fortune for it, in which case we're going to embed AI in everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's something to watch. When I was talking to Mark, the mining minister for the Northern Territory, when I was talking to him, I go, if you wind up with all this gas, I mean, you're going to wind up with data centers there.
Yeah.
And he talked about how they've put in high-tech telecommunication lines from Darwin to various places.
Yeah, they're going up to Asia and out into the
Yeah.
Pacific, and it's going to become a bit of a data
Yeah,
hub.
it's going to be a hub. So that's kind of the message that we say a lot around digital wildcatters in the United States is, hey, natural gas guys, you got to stop thinking that you're selling natural gas. You're actually selling electrons.
Yeah, right.
And go figure that out. Because the one thing that might happen in the United States, but I want to actually hear what you have to say about this. In the United States, nuclear might power the future. Y'all have no nukes in Australia.
There is actually a nuclear power plant in Sydney called
There is.
Lucas Heights, and it's been in operation for decades, but it's only used for medical purposes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And
I'd
so-
read somewhere there
in
were
research.
no nukes.
But so we in Australia we've just started a big political debate about nuclear energy. So in Australia, we've got the equivalent of the Republicans is called the Liberal Party, and they're in coalition with the Nationals, which is all the farmers. So they're like the Conservatives. Then on the progressive side, we've got the Labor Party, who are the equivalent of the Democrats. And Labor is anti-nuclear, and they just want to keep going with renewables with gas backup. Whereas the Conservative parties have just released their policy platform, which would start with a handful of SMRs, small modular reactors, and then look to go from there. So there's this huge debate raging, and it's really interesting, like the way that the general population is reacting to it, right? So, 40 or 50 years ago, there was a big anti-nuclear movement here in Australia. Greenpeace were big on it. Interestingly, in Australia, it's a bit split on party lines. But one of the really interesting things coming out of the polling is that young people today are actually much more supportive of nuclear than young people were 30 or 40 years ago, because kids these days are so tech savvy. And so they research it and they understand the technology and they understand that it's safe and you're not going to have, three-eyed koalas walking around and all the rest of it. So, it's, look, I think it's essential. I mean, we talk about no transition and that it's actually addition of everything. I think we need a lot of nuclear in this country, but I do think it's going to take quite a while to get up and running.
So what's the Australian band that sings How Do We Sleep When Our
Midnight
Beds-"
Oil.
Midnight, because
Yeah.
that guy ran for prime minister
Yeah,
on
yeah.
totally no nukes.
Peter Garrett.
And he
yeah.
got like 2% of the vote or 3% of the vote.
Yeah, he
right?
actually ended up becoming a member of parliament for the Labor Party.
Did he really?
Yeah.
So that's it. So walk me through what happens discussion-wise on natural gas. What does the population think? What do both political parties think? Because we did see a no fracking sign when we were in
Yeah.
Darwin.
Yep,
We did.
yep. The yellow triangle.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's interesting. Like, I think within the inner cities, we have a political dynamic that is becoming quite similar to what I've seen of what's happening in politics in the US, right? So I go to the US quite a lot, and I have been right through my career. And, you know, in the US, you've got, you know, California and New York have become very left-leaning. And actually, as they become wealthier, a lot of those inner city hubs have become even more left-leaning. And then you've just got the rest of the country that, you know, in the way I've witnessed it, you know, they want less government in their lives, more economic development, more independence. It's kind of similar here in Australia. So, you know, in the inner cities, and particularly in some of the very wealthy enclaves of the inner cities, there is a lot of anti-gas sentiment, and it's people who I think are fundamentally well-meaning. They want the world to be a cleaner place. They believe in climate change. They want a reduction in emissions. But then outside of, you know, a lot of those sort of inner city groups and amongst those sort of inner city elites, I think there are a hell of a lot of people who, first of all, a lot of people who come off the land, not everyone, but a lot of people who come off the land have coexisted with the mining industry for a long time. And so they know that if it's done the right way, there's mutual benefit. I think there are also a lot of Australians who are really suffering under cost of living pressures at the moment. So, you know, we had a golden run in our economy for like 30 years where interest rates literally just dropped in a straight line for 30 years. They've now turned around. Inflation's very high. People are struggling to pay their bills. And I think a lot of those people are starting to work out that it's not necessarily, you know, solar panels, for example, are not necessarily the cheapest form of energy because their power bills keep going up.
Right.
The more solar panels come into the system. So, you know, it has been a pretty politically charged issue, gas, over the last couple of years. But the more renewables that are being put into the system, I think more people are understanding how important gas is as a complement. And you know, as an example, our federal government just released a big thing called the Future Gas Strategy, which was really about underlining their support for our industry, pointing out that we're going to need gas well beyond 2050. And from a Northern Territory context, and fundamentally, Northern Territorians are by far the most important stakeholders for the Beetaloo because it's their land that we're going to be developing this industry on. You know, there are the anti-frackers as they call them, but you know, I must say, you know, I meet a lot of people from right across the spectrum in the Northern Territory, and there is very, very broad support for us up there. And you know, it's interesting, like in Australia, we have this concept called the Quiet Australians, and Quiet Australians are people that are pro-mining, pro-oil and gas, pro-small government, whatever, but they don't talk about it publicly, right? They just get on with their lives, but each one of those Quiet Australians has just as many votes as a very loud anti-industry person. And actually,
in America,
yeah,
that was under Nixon, the same sort of concept, supposedly.
Yeah. So, and you know, I think I've seen with other types of resource developments in Australia, the activists, they tend to make a big song and dance to drum up support, and particularly as you get to the key point of moving into initial production, and they run fear campaigns and all the rest of it. But then these big projects start producing, they start creating thousands of jobs, creating a hell of a lot of tax revenue, and people realise that the sky didn't fall in, and then the activists tend to move on to the next thing and you get general acceptance. So, you know, there are anti-frackers in Darwin, but, you know, I think once we get the gas flowing, that'll put downward pressure on people's household energy bills, jobs will be created, You know, the restaurants will be full, which is good for local businesses and employment and all the rest of it. I think we'll get through that phase and move on to bigger and better things.
Because my vibe when I was up there, and of course it's total selection bias, right?
Yeah, you're
We have
surrounded
this-
by oil and gas people.
Yeah, I'm surrounded by all these
yeah.
oil and gas. So of course, plus they know I'm an oil and gas person. So, but it felt a lot more accepting. It almost felt like being in Midland, out in West Texas.
Yeah, there is a bit of that.
It definitely felt more accepting. Ultimately, in the United States, I don't know how to say it except we suck in the energy business on telling our story. I mean, you just were
Absolutely.
very eloquent there, laid out jobs, lower cost of living, all that. We can't do that. We throw facts and figures out if we even try to do it, and we
Yeah.
mess it up and we just piss everyone off.
Yeah.
So kudos to you guys in Australia for seemingly doing it better.
Well, I think our industry in this country has some of the same issue. But, I guess that's one of the reasons I was very keen to have a chat with you today. I think we do need to get the message out. And, on Thursday night when you were introducing Brian at that dinner, you made the point that we need to be proud of our industry. And, I'm very proud to work in this industry. I think it's an awesome industry that people don't realize how much positive impact it has on their lives. And, we've got to get the message out more. It's really important because without reliable and affordable energy, we'd be having this conversation in the dark, right? So,
and I said this the other night, and we should probably say it on every podcast every time. It's when you go from burning dung and wood in your house for heat and cooking
yeah,
to burning hydrocarbons and using electricity, your life expectancy doubles.
yeah,
I mean, and so it's a big deal.
yeah. It's I've been. Have you read Liberty Energy's new Bettering Human Lives?
I've read some of it. I need to read.
Yeah,
the whole
I'm
thing.
about halfway through. I mean, the way it talks about the history of the increasing density of energy sources through history and the way that and it's fascinating. Like, I love history, right? So, the fact that like the Dutch trading empire actually was built on peat, which was a more dense form of energy than wood, which allowed them to start moving into the cities and generating excess wealth. Then the United Kingdom, a big driver of their wealth was moving from peat to coal, which is a denser form of energy. And obviously your great country, I think in many regards, was built on the back of the incredible oil and gas wealth that it has.
The East, we say that time and time again. The East Texas oil field probably won World War II. I mean, when I say we, I mean the Allies, all of us, Australia, Great Britain, the United States, had fuel for our tanks, and the Germans didn't.
Exactly. Well, the Germans went and got slaughtered at Stalingrad trying to get into the Russian oil fields, right? Millions of people unfortunately passed away there. But the other more modern example of this, I think, is that, and again, I'm totally biased because I come from the oil and gas industry, but when the world was pulling itself out of the global financial crisis, printing heaps of money and dropping interest rates to zero, sure, that helps. I mean, but it's like taking a drug, right? Short-term gain,
crack cocaine,
bloody long-term pain. But I think the explosion of shale gas in America just was as important as monetary policy in pulling the US and ultimately the world out of that Great Recession. Cheap energy meant manufacturing started coming back to the US, all the jobs created around that. So
I'm kind of a bit of I'm a little snarky when I do this, but there's some seriousness to it. Because people talk about, well, we have these unplugged wells in America that we need to plug. And it's like, yes, we do need to do that. They always say, oh, the industry needs to do that. And I always jokingly say, no, I think Amazon should do it because we don't have all these Amazon vans running around unless we have cheap oil. And that's what That's what the U.S. shale revolution did. U.S. went from decade upon decade in decline to actually doubling the amount of oil we're producing. Made it pretty cheap. Made vans go everywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm not going to promote that because we have a very strict regulatory regime in the Northern Territory where we have to take responsibility for the plugging of wells. But I certainly get what you're saying.
We're getting better. We're getting better about it. We'll start plugging our wells. So
yeah.
All right. I hate to put you on the spot.
Yeah.
We've talked energy. You've sold me. So the podcast that I will drop in the past when this actually airs, but since we're recording, it'll be the podcast this week, is actually titled "Is Darwin the Next Midland, Texas?" Because it's gonna be my interview with Stephanie Berlin and then my speech and all that. So you've talked me up. I'm sold. I'm ready to come be an Aussie oil man. But I'm gonna throw you on the spot. What is cricket? Please explain cricket. What is this?
So cricket is one of my favourite sports. I'm a huge rugby fan, and the Australian team is called the Wallabies, and they won on the weekend after a horrendous run. So I'm enjoying a bit of false hope. But cricket is a crazy sport.
I can follow rugby. I sort of get it. I go, I've seen soccer. I've seen American football. Let's combine it. Okay, I got it. I can pick up because I can watch any sport I've never seen.
Yeah.
And within about 20 minutes, I'll tell you the rules.
Yeah.
Give me 45 minutes to an hour, and then I'll start telling you strategy.
Yeah.
Cricket, the best I can figure is it's the reason to have a weekend bender. That's all.
Well, it's nearly a week-long bender because
holy cow.
So cricket started. It actually started in France. The English claim that they started it, but it started with this French cricket, which was a very, very simple bat and ball game where you had the bat and somebody would throw the ball at you and their aim was to hit your legs and then you were out, or you could hit the ball and knock it away. The English then exported it around the world with their empire. Us as Australians, we are absolutely cricket mad. Also, if you ever go to India, it is like a religion for them. Like, They were in a World Cup final for a shorter version of the game recently. Literally 900 million Indians watched the game live. 900 million people watching a game out of a population of 1.2 billion. It is a very strange sport. What I love about Test cricket, which is the purest form of the game, which lasts for 5 years, is that
5 years?
5 days.
Okay, wow.
You would feel like it was 5 years
I
watching
was
it.
about to say.
So
Major League Baseball in America feels like 5 years to me, but go ahead. Yeah.
So it's 5 days long. It starts at 10:30 in the morning. It goes till 6 o'clock at night. And the most likely outcome of this 5-day saga is a draw. So often neither team wins. I developed a love for that game because the Australian Test team will host another country's Test team over the Christmas period, which is our summer holidays. And so it's that time of year where you've forgotten what day of the week it is. You go for a swim in the pool, cook a barbecue for the kids. You've got it on in the background, or you're just sitting there lying on the couch for hour on end, having a beer or two. If you develop a lifelong understanding of it, it's an incredibly exciting game. If you haven't watched it before, it's really boring. But what I will suggest to you, which I think you'd really enjoy, so they've developed these shorter versions of the game. Next time you're out in Australia, we'll take you to what's called a 20-20 match. It takes 4 hours. And the beauty of that is that there's only 20 overs of 6 balls each. And so on every single shot, the batter is trying to hit the ball out of the park. And that is fun to watch. So we'll
the
take
home
you to
run
watch.
derby.
It's literally
we do that.
like that. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So we'll
I'm
go to
going to take you up on that because I'm
for sure.
quite certain we will be back to Australia. This has been cool.
You do have to support the Sydney Sixers, though.
Okay. So I'm a Hawthorn Hawk when it comes to the AFL.
Yeah.
But the Sydney what is
Sydney Sixers is my
Sixers?
2020 crickets.
Okay,
team.
like number 6 Sixers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because they hit if you hit the ball over the fence on the full, you get 6 runs. So that's why they're
Okay.
the sixes.
Got it. The six.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
will take you up on that.
Yeah.
Alex, you were cool to sit down with us.
No, great to see you.
Where do people find out more about Empire?
So our web address is empireenergygroup.net. We're also listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. Our stock code is EEG. And for people out there who want to buy it, you just press the green button. But yeah, our website's got heaps of presentations, all the information about our company. And if anyone out there in Digital Wildcatters world wants to get in touch, our email address is info@empiregp.net, and we'd be delighted to tell people about the story because we're pretty proud of it and excited about it.
Cool.
Awesome.
Anything we should have covered that we didn't?
I don't think so.
Yeah. No, I think I've gotten pretty good at editing these things in my head as I go, where I say, maybe we'll cut that out, or sometimes I'll even stop a guest and say, hey, you shouldn't have said that. Could you catch them?
Yeah.
Crushed it.
Awesome.
Dude, I couldn't imagine editing this thing.
No worries.
Yeah, it seems great.
Might have to go and have a beer.
Let's do it. I'm in. That's
Good
one of
stuff.
my favorite things. No 2 words have ever gotten me in more trouble in my life than I'm in.